Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday you heard principally about Three Waters and the infrastructure and what that means for communities across the country. Today we want to focus on the freshwater issue. However, freshwater underlies what you talked about yesterday anyway, so it encompasses the whole 2 days. Clearly we are in a period of transformational change. We've got environmental reform, we've got the Three Waters work that you heard about yesterday, and you also heard about the challenges that are likely to be forthcoming in terms of the Havelock North inquiry and resultant changes in terms of potable and probably wastewater in that environment. We're trying to deal with a Zero Carbon Act. What does that mean in terms of fresh water? We are trying to deal with a program from the administration to plant 1 billion trees. What does that mean in terms of the ability to plant those trees, the effect on fresh water, both in planting and in harvesting, which will be 25, 30 years out. And we're trying to deal with climate adaptation. So all those things have some influence to a greater or lesser degree on the freshwater debate. Now, some of this change is about regulation, but it's not all about regulation. We have a continuing, and I would consider it to be an excellent relationship with Minister Parker, Minister for the Environment, and some of these issues I will share with you later. Let us remember that there is a diverse range of legitimate values and interests at stake here across the country. It's our job as water managers, so I'm referring to regional councils and unitaries here, to manage these values and reflect on the interests as we create water policy and set limits for communities and catchments across the country. We are constantly mindful and reminded of the relationship between the four well-beings, so that's environmental, cultural, economics, and the tension that inevitably will arise as we go through this journey. There are many legacy issues that we're going to have to deal with. Most of these are catchment-based, and it means that real progress is going to be real challenging, and as you heard yesterday, it's going to be costly. So in thinking about any reform program, we need to be mindful of a few key principles. How regional councils and unitaries deal with these issues and respond will be different between regions and also within regions in terms of their severity, in the underlying cause and in the appropriate responses. Each council's ability to respond will also vary on the quality of the demographics and the rating base in the particular area. So the message here is one size does not fit all. We need place-based solutions, and we need genuinely durable responses which will require community input. So today I want to focus on 3 matters. The first is, what is the current state of fresh water? So let's look at some of the data, the science. I want to use some Ministry of Environment data as well as Land and Water Aotearoa data. The second point, what needs to be done from our perspective to meet the objectives of the administration, so that's the government. And as you know, there have been no policy changes to date, but Minister Parker has been clear about his expectations to stop further degradation. In other words, hold the line, address sedimentation, both rural and urban, address nutrient management, essentially through nitrogen, which is the current debate, speed up implementation, and improve the percentage of urban waterways so we meet swimmability targets of 2040. The last one I want to address is, how can this be achieved? Regional councils and unitary authority give advice on water policy, and we've given some advice to the Minister in recent weeks in terms of how we think his objective of making this Waka Go Faster can be achieved. So if I can manage this. So what is the current state of fresh water? There's a perception in the wider community that fresh water is often a rural issue. However, as you heard yesterday, there is a growing recognition and acceptance that urban waterways, although they may be shorter in total length, are more polluted, are more at risk, and in need of the most remediation relative to their rural colleagues. The swimmability data interpretation that I'm about to show you, yes, it is based on the metric of E. coli and toxic algae, and there are a whole lot of other contributors to water quality. And it's a combination, this is very important, it's a combination of actual versus model data. When I go through some of these slides, which are regional slides, I'll explain this further. So let's see. So this is the current state of freshwater in the Bay of Plenty region, which is the regional council that I chair. So you can see in the Bay of Plenty here, 94% of all rivers have an excellent, good or fair water quality for swimming. 85% of the lakes, which are essentially around the Rotorua region, have good quality data as well. And you'll see the red ones there, and those red and orange ones, essentially lowland, reclaimed, which we would call wetlands in the 1800s, that have now been rehabilitated by way of flood control schemes, and essentially a lot of these areas are actually below high tide level, and they're running pumping schemes, so hence some issues that we have to deal with there. So let's look at another one. So this is Taranaki, and you can see that Taranaki here, in terms of the data set that was used, has some challenges. The issue regarding modelling is that when they looked at some of these regions, not just Taranaki, it's across the whole country, they looked at the land use that applied within the region and said, well, given that land use, what's a reasonable expectation in terms of the nutrient flows into these rivers? So some of this, as I said, is actual and some of it is modelled. However, inherently, for people who know Taranaki, you've got pristine mountain in terms of Mount Egmont, you've got the big national park around it, you've got really short form rivers feeding out to the coast. So inherently, does this data seem right? Because the Taranaki Regional Council is probably the regional council in the country who has done the most and is at the forefront of riparian planting and fencing off waterways. But this is the data that we've got, and this is the data that we have to use, or the Taranaki Regional Council is going to have to use in terms of their rohe. This one is the Northern region, and I see the Chair and Chief Executive of the Northern Regional Council here today, and they know this better than I do, but this is probably one of the worst. So what is the issue here in terms of Northland? Those of you who know Northland, you've got the Northern Wairoa River, and I'd suggest no matter what you do in that catchment, it's going to be a challenge because of the geography in which the Northern Wairoa River runs before it gets to the sea. You also have the Waipawa Forest, and I'm reliably informed by Bill that some of the coli measurements coming out of the Waipawa Forest are really quite high. So is it a matter of contamination, or is it a matter of a combination of contamination occurring from natural sources as opposed to the elevated levels of temperature that are giving the data set that we have here? So that's the MFE data. And this here is the LAWA data. So the LAWA data is an online platform for sharing environmental data and information. It's monitoring data from all New Zealand's regional and unitary councils, and it's freely available on the website. So this River Trends report was released in April of this year. The report revealed that for all river water quality parameters monitored over a 10-year period, more sites were improving than deteriorating. For every monitored parameter, more sites showed evidence of improving water quality than degrading. And this was led by the Qualtron Institute, so it was independent. So again, this is an encouraging picture. It's been welcomed by scientists, clearly not by all, and local government, and it demonstrates the improvement to water quality across New Zealand for multiple attributes, not just E. coli. But it does say also that there's a lot of work in front of us because some of the data set in there have termed it indeterminate in terms of trends. One of the biggest challenges that we face as a sector is what I refer to as point source discharge in terms of nutrients. into waterways, estuaries, and that includes stormwater contamination. So essentially, the challenge in terms of point source discharges falls to the territorial authorities, it falls to industries. It's a function of old consents, it's a function of old infrastructure and old technology, and you heard some from very esteemed gentlemen yesterday in terms of the challenges that they face not only in New Zealand here, but internationally. This is the conspicuous evidence of increasing population and urbanisation, and we need to reflect on that. However, having said that, rural or provincial contribution is far more diffuse and inconspicuous, but it poses a greater risk in our efforts to rehabilitate at-risk waterways. Dissolved inorganic nitrogen, dissolved reactive phosphate, pathogens, which you heard about yesterday, which include the protozoa, and minimum flow rates in waterways pose a significant risk to ecological health, to human health, and their impact is not only delayed, in some cases for decades, so I'm now talking about the ageing of water, but conversely, our ability to turn them around will equally span decades. You have to say, as a general comment, that agricultural practices have improved significantly over the past decades, where point source discharge to water is all but gone. But runoff and diffuse discharges to land have brought new issues of what is the appropriate loading, what are the appropriate application times, and how do you effectively measure nutrients via different mediums that they're applied to, such as the soil types, rainfall, and the topography. There is no doubt that the expansion of dairying into regions not traditionally dairy and the increasing levels of nitrogenous fertiliser have had an effect on waterway degradation. This clearly demonstrates that you'll see here we've got the growth of nitrogenous fertiliser. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the latest data, but I think that there's probably been an increase from about 2009 there up to about 2014, I would say, and then it's probably levelled off. But clearly, this is going to be one of the legacy issues that we're going to have to deal with in terms of the diffuse effect of nitrates getting into waterways. Let me do this. And this is another contributor. So this is the increase in growth of what we refer to as PKE, palm kernel extract, which, as you know, has been imported in rather large volumes in a number of years since 2000. This goes from 2007, 2008 through to last year. So it's essentially 2 million tonne a year that gets taken on to dairy farms, and it's used for a range of purposes. So you would have to say, what has driven these statistics in terms of both nitrogenous fertiliser and PKE? Well, it's essentially about price and market signals. Farmers will ultimately follow the dollar. Is this about intensification? Because the issue about intensification, you have to determine, is it about land management practices or is it about stocking rate per hectare? Clearly, in terms of what's driving this, is that from about 2000, you had a change in the dairy industry to the principle and the vehicle known as Fonterra. And in doing that, there was an act called the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act that said Fonterra had to take all milk from whomever it was offered. So I question the logic on an economic basis of dairying in, say, the Mackenzie country, but clearly that decision was driven by the requirement for Fonterra to take milk from wherever it was offered as a result of its monopoly position. But clearly, whether it's PKE or whether it's nitrogen, these are the market reactions from the industry participants who are following policy or direction from likes of Dairy NZ, who said dairy industry had to increase at a compounding rate of 2% per year to remain stable. It's also following market signals in terms of processes, saying we want a return on our assets. In other words, you don't have assets not fully utilised. In order to do that, you give market signals at either end of the grass curve, and that's driven the increase in terms of nitrogen as well as inputs to PKE. So farmers are trying to essentially get more days in milk, which challenges the utilisation of the traditional biological grass curve. So that leads me into what needs to be done to meet the current objectives of the government. Minister Parker wants improvement across a number of bands, being E. coli, sediment, MCI, inorganic nitrogen, phosphate, and he wants the influence of this quality extended to estuaries, which wasn't in the last NPS. He wants to hold the line to avoid further degradation of water quality. He wants some assurance that the CME, so that's compliant monitoring enforcement, are being effectively carried out by regional councils, and he wants urban water addressed. It's expected that an updated national policy statement on fresh water will be released by the end of 2019, and we expect the government to consider the need for an NPS in estuaries and another NPS on productive land also to be forthcoming. Minister Parker has asked the industry, so that's essentially the regional councils, how can this WOCA, in terms of improved performance, go faster? As I said, he has concerns about monitoring compliance and the level of prosecutions sitting within regional councils. So, on to 3. What's the way forward in terms of trying to meet some of these challenges? This shouldn't say non-regulation, this should be saying non-regulatory. There is growing evidence that communities themselves will address their catchment issues given the opportunity and the involvement of support from industry and from local government. This slide here is a community, this is Māori land, Montecular and Māori land, at the foot of the Uruweras. So this is a community that's really socially economic deprived, but they have a lot of land that's got natural waterways through it. A regulatory approach to say you must fence these off would never get any traction in this type of community. These people are Tūhoe. They're extremely proud of the whenua that they have. So what did this local community do in terms of a catchment? The regional council provided the hardware, so that's the posts and the fencing, and there's only about 14 farmers in this catchment. So the local farmers had a working bee, and one day they went up there and they did about 3.5 kilometres of fencing, and then they walked away. Now I'd suggest to you the local farmers would not have done that if this had been a regulatory approach to trying to address this catchment. But the relationships that are formed will be enduring, because the tangata whenua will endeavour to understand management practices further down the catchment, and it's a partnership going forward. And James and Alan will expand further on this non-regulatory approach and working with communities as we go forward. But a non-regulatory approach and interventions will only get us so far. Farm environment plans, good management practice, and their role in terms of pastoral farming are going through a renaissance, and guidelines with industry have been agreed, and there's a release next week in the Waikato with the Minister in terms of good management practices. Recognition that working with stakeholders is critical to achieving the water quality we all want. We need funding to do our work and priority catchments that are degraded, because we need to concentrate on those first. So what is the way forward in terms of trying to address the Minister's issues? Regulation is part of what we do, and it's a critical part which Minister Parker acknowledges. We're all in the midst of setting limits in our catchments, and the target for that is 2025. But essentially, regional councils and unitaries need changes to make the regulation work better and for the communities. Regulation is clearly the last option to corral the laggards, but the reality is it has to be put in place. Prosecution will require a very high level of evidential integrity to support the case, and when you're dealing with science and with models, that is not easy. I'd have to say, there is no in terms of compliance, monitoring, enforcement, concerns have been raised about CME by the Minister, by environmental NCOs, and by the public. There is no political direction or intervention in regulatory enforcement in most regional councils. I use that cautiously because I can't give you an absolute guarantee that some don't, but in the ones that I've been involved with, there is no political involvement. Sometimes we're criticised for not doing our jobs, and other times we're criticised for doing it. We're responding to criticisms of how we perform our function. Regional councils do collaborate. We share knowledge and skills and do peer reviews of procedures and decision making. And we have a group called SIGs, subject special interest groups, across the sector, and they frequently meet to share this information, knowledge and processes. We have improved our practice, and both the Office of the Auditor General has recognised this, as has done the Environmental Defence Society in a report that they did on CME. Regional and unitary councils have generally improved significantly over the past decade in the way they administer their CME role. Increasing capacity, professionalism, monitoring and reporting processes are evident. Regional and unitaries must bolster efforts, however, to ensure they behave as credible regulators and put in place systems to make the separation of governance and operations clearly evident. We know there's varying capability and robustness across the sector. Some are resourced better than others. Councils have developed a spectrum of approach to CME, and that's through engaging, educate, enable and enforce. We recognise that more direct enforcement models, including prosecution, form a vital part of any CME regime. And as you heard yesterday from the gentleman from the UK, clearly their approach to prosecution is a lot harder than what ours is, and him being a regulator. I'm confident that the upward trajectory in the CME capability and effectiveness will continue in the years to come. So the next topic here we've got improved plan agility, and this is probably where the biggest challenges lie. Improving plan agility will essentially challenge the collaborative process under a Schedule 1 process. There needs to be some principles for reform, and it needs to be based on science and really good models. Councils are often responding to really short timeframes. One of the problems is the statutory timeframes required and necessary to change a plan. We get caught up in very lengthy hearings and appeal processes. Plans can be out of date before they're operative. It's a long-standing problem and will be compounded by the need for most regional plans under the NPSFM to be rolled out with a series of sub-regional plan changes, including catchment-specific plans of 25. Plans, the reality is a lot of these plans will be out of date before they're operative. Part of the solution is to adopt a plan-making process nationwide that removes the de novo Environment Court appeal. Such a decision-making model would at least halve the time required to make regional plans operative. So let's move to decision-making. We have long supported represented decision-making within a democratic system of regional government, and that support continues. However, regional land and water plans require specialist knowledge and experience to be brought to bear to the hearings. Water plans and associated science and modelling is complex. We think the decision-making at all levels has at times suffered from inadequate expertise in the decision-making forum. There is currently a very small pool of experienced water management decision makers. We need to build capacity in this field. One of the options we've suggested is to establish a pool of specialist water commissioners who can be deployed around the country, who hold the institutional knowledge about science and models, and who hopefully can bring greater consistency and efficiency to decision making. That's not saying we're going to kick for touch the local input, but it's essentially saying that you have a specialist group of people who can sit alongside local commissioners who bring to the table the specialist knowledge. So that takes us on to models. Models, as you know, are important tools for informing water management, increasingly so. We've heard a lot about the model being overseer, and it's used to manage nitrogen budgets, and it's used as a regulatory tool by some, but not by all. The government has just committed $5 million to overseer in the recent budget to improve the horsepower in terms of the outputs they're getting. Its potential continues to be explored, but models are inherently complex to understand. And I think a classic example in terms of models is the circumstances of Horizon 1 plan, where one day 80% of the consents complied. We had a model change in terms of overseer. Overnight, 80% of those consents didn't comply. These are some of the inherent problems we're dealing with. However, having said that, science is the vehicle by the way we must move forward. So, let me just wrap up. So in closing, water, so that's clean and fresh water, has been a commodity that historically we have used, we've treasured, but we've never given a value to. You turn the tap on, it delivers. You flush it, it goes. And in my youth and childhood, we could swim everywhere. You could swim in the rivers, you could swim in the lakes, you could swim in the estuaries. But the value attribute is now clearly in front of us. And that's about the value attribute of the allocation, not only of fresh water, but the allocation of nutrients to the body in which we're dealing, the catchment body. These decisions are much easier in catchments that aren't fully allocated in terms of the freshwater resource or the ability to take nutrients. However, in catchments that are fully allocated, there will be some collateral damage in bringing them back to an equilibrium. We have some of the best water quality and available water in the world. We've got a temperate climate, you're never really short of water unless you live in Marlborough or some parts of Canterbury. But we need to ensure there is compatibility between growth, so that's population growth, that's industry growth, and its GDP contribution, and the value of our environment. But we're not the trailblazers, not necessarily the trailblazers in terms of this regard. A decade or so ago, I had the opportunity to go to IMD in Lausanne, which is in Switzerland. And for those who have been there before, absolutely beautiful place. The town is essentially on the edge of the lake. The water in that lake is pristine. You see the fish swimming around. It's probably like Lake Wakatipu. So it has been done in some very densely populated areas throughout the world with just management. And we can improve where the decline is evident. But we must recognise, as was said yesterday, that these changes will come at a cost. They'll come at a cost to communities, they'll come at a cost to individuals. So my closing message is priorities must be set, again in conjunction with the communities, as to what are the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves in our community. And essentially, the choice is going to be ours. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.